Very much. 8 minutes past 10. Good morning. In an exclusive broadcast interview, a 29-year-old mum who was jailed for falsely claiming she was raped after a night out tells us the experience has destroyed her life, leaving her constantly anxious and scared to go out. In 2009, Layla Ibrahim said she'd been the victim of a violent attack. But the police became suspicious and accused her of beating herself up and faking the rape. Miss Ibrahim was subsequently prosecuted for perverting the course of justice. A judge jailed her for 3 years, saying she was, quote, wicked. Her supporters say she's been the victim of an appalling miscarriage of justice and are trying to help her clear her name through the Criminal Cases Review Commission. I've been speaking to her and Lisa Longstaff from Women Against Rape. Miss Ibrahim says the conviction has had a terrible impact on her.
I can't go anywhere, do anything. I'm anxious of being here, for instance, today. It's literally done that. It's destroyed it completely.
Let's go back to January 2009. You've been to a few pubs, I think, with friends. What happened after that?
We'd left the town. I'd headed off to go home, leaving my friends. They were living in a different direction. I'd started to walk home, and I took a shortcut to get me home a lot quicker. I walked through, and as I was just into the cut, these two boys, to be honest with you, I still don't know where they could have came from, and that's where the attack took place.
Do you remember much about the attack or not really?
I remember pieces because I was knocked to the ground by one of the males, which gave me quite a knock to the head. Presumably I was unconscious for a little while. But there's parts where I remember waking up and it was just a thud. And that's, you know, where I realised bloody hell's going on. So it was just dreadful. I'm sorry.
It's all right. It's all right. You don't need to apologise. Take your time. You really do not need to apologise. Clearly the police were called.
Yes.
And how did you feel they approached your complaint initially?
When they arrived, I was really dishevelled. My mum and my sister did a lot of the talking for me because I was clearly not in any state to do so. However, they didn't seem to know what to do or how to respond to the call. I was waiting around for a female officer to arrive. Eventually one did, and she'd already admitted to me that she'd never dealt with anything of this sort, so she was waiting for a special pack to arrive. And we were sort of sat around for most of the morning in my mum's house, and they'd taken different things as evidence. For instance, my ring, stained tissues from the toilet, etc. And yet none of them were ever followed up or found.
Right. And you told them that you tried to fend off the attackers with a pair of scissors that you carried in your bag.
Yes, that's correct.
And that they had grabbed the scissors and used those on you and cut your hair, I think. Explain why you were carrying scissors around with you.
I've always carried them. It's just something I've always had. I'm quite large-chested and I have a lot of bra malfunctions. And I've always just carried them around. It was something not different for me.
You talked about the things that hadn't been tested, and male blood was also found at the scene, I think. Was that tested?
No, not that I'm aware of, no.
Why not?
That's the questions we're hoping to get answers for, to be honest.
When did you notice a change in the police's attitude to the case then?
Very early, I think, I would say at the very most just over a week. They started asking the questions differently and they were approaching different things differently, by more aimed at me than what actually happened and looking at the evidence they had.
I think they said things like they thought it strange that you told them the batteries in your phone were flat. They also told you that forensics suggested there was no soil on your clothes from the grass where you say you were attacked. And then you responded by saying you didn't want to answer any more questions. Tell us why.
That's correct. I chose not to because that's when it started to look as though they were turning it to me. And clearly I had a right to have a solicitor with me. And that's the reason as to why I didn't answer the questions.
And how do you rationalise the fact that there were differences in your statements?
I don't believe there was, and to be honest with you, I was unconscious for most of it, and I was trying to piece it myself for my own mind.
How did you hear the news that the attack was effectively no longer under investigation?
They'd called my mum initially and told her at work that they were planning on arresting me, in which case, obviously, my mum had contacted myself to let me know.
Which was a huge change from the fact that earlier there'd been something like 30 to 40 officers working on the case, hadn't there?
Yes, that's correct.
And I think you say that they told you you would be charged with wasting police time if you didn't drop the case.
That's correct.
What was your reaction to that?
I said no, obviously. I wasn't going to say I did something when I didn't. And they eventually decided to drop wasting police time and just go with perverting the court of justice.
You were under a lot of stress for
Yes.
all sorts of reasons at the time.
Of course.
And you tried to take your own life a month afterwards. Can you try to describe the kind of pressure that you were feeling?
Overwhelming, to be honest. Just going through the ordeal itself to then be arrested for it, my head just didn't understand it. And I couldn't cope with all of it anymore.
What they were effectively saying was that you beat yourself up, you attacked yourself, and either faked a rape or had consensual sex and then said it was a rape.
Yes, I think that's the cover they were trying to make. However, there was the blood at the scene, there was blood on my ring, there was different witnesses calling in saying they'd seen two males around the area at the time. There was, I believe, 3 of them in total, and none were followed up, including one woman who said she was intimidated enough by them to cross over the road so she wasn't walking past them. But it was just all overlooked. It was, how can a person determine what time somebody's going to be at that area for, or find a place where there's going to be blood? It just doesn't make sense. It really doesn't make sense how they could turn it that way.
Ultimately, though, you were convicted of perverting the course of justice. A jury sat there and listened to the evidence for and against you and decided that you had lied, that you had made it up. And when sentencing you to 3 years in jail for perverting the course of justice, the judge said your behaviour throughout the proceedings have been irresponsible in the extreme, and many would say wicked. He went on to say you tore your own clothing, you cut your body with a pair of scissors, and you feigned illness and injury. It was clear that you craved attention.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. You'd have to be mentally not right for something like that, and it just doesn't make sense at all. It really doesn't. The jury, but the case itself, I don't feel was presented properly, and I don't understand why, to be honest.
Lisa Longstaff from Women Against Rape, what do you think of this case?
I think it's a very serious miscarriage of justice. We've been working with Layla since the day she was convicted. We've been trying to find lawyers who would, document what's happened and put in an appeal, and we're working on that now. We've actually helped put together a submission to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, asking that the evidence be looked at again, because as Layla describes, the police turned on her extremely quickly. The search for evidence quickly shifted from investigating her attack into investigating her and finding evidence against her, and a number of decisions followed which meant that the forensic evidence wasn't tested properly, witnesses were not followed up properly, As she said, pubic hair was found on her body that was destroyed in testing. The ring was lost. You know, there are a number of serious errors, you could put it, which undermined her defence and boosted the prosecution. And she has had a lot of support. The police doctor believed her and gave evidence for her defence, and others, you know, and people who've worked with her since, including probation officers and so on. And her family, us, you know, a lot of people in her community are very shocked by what's happened to her.
Do you have to bring new evidence for a case to be reviewed by the Criminal Cases Review Commission?
Yes, you do. You need to find new evidence. And
have you done that?
Well, yes, we've looked at all the papers together with the lawyers, and we've put together a case that we think merits a serious look at by them and a reinvestigation. We think that some of the forensic tests still need to be done that were neglected at the time, and we're hoping that people will come forward because somebody knows who these two men are. And some of the suspects who were interviewed at the time or looked at the time were not properly questioned. You know, there was a contradictory alibi given for one of them by two different sets of people about where he was at the time. Things like that, which, you know, they just jump out at you when you see the evidence.
What is the new evidence you're bringing then?
Well, as I say, we've gone through the paperwork. We believe that the case wasn't presented properly in court. The evidence from the forensic doctor was not taken seriously enough and not presented well enough. The person who was brought in to give his opinion about her state of mind and the likelihood that these injuries were self-inflicted was challenged, but not strongly enough. And you know, I think if that's the main evidence the jury is given, it's very persuasive to them. And when you have a judge who was also quite biased, in our opinion, making comments, calling her evil and so on, that is very persuasive to a jury. You know, things have changed somewhat. This was 2010, remember, before Jimmy Savile, and where, you know, rape was seen as something unusual, and lying, women making false allegations has historically been something that has been put out, particularly by the legal establishment, you know, going back to Sir Matthew Hale, a judge in 1736. A lot of legal changes that we've campaigned for, like to criminalise rape in marriage, has been opposed because they always said, oh, it's so easy for women to lie. You know, and gradually we have won some changes, some significant changes in the law which give women a bit more protection. Sadly, such cases are still coming forward. And I mean, one of our main concerns is that we see wealthy men, sometimes in positions of authority, turning on women and the media, suing the women, suing media.
So who are you talking about in this case, though? You're not talking about the judge there, are you?
I'm not talking about anyone in this case.
Right,
I'm
okay.
saying that this chimes with what we're seeing is that policies and practices are too much determined by people who are saying they've been wrongly accused. And as a result, you know, there is still a tendency for the evidence not to be collected properly, and for women to even end up being prosecuted for false allegations or for something that they've done. Look at the women in Rotherham. Okay. A lot of them ended up with convictions for underage drinking or for criminal damage, while their attackers were let off the hook.
Layla, Ibrahim, if you don't succeed in quashing this conviction effectively, then what?
There's not a lot more I can do, I suppose. It's something I'll just have to live with.
Okay.
But I'm hoping I'll get the justice I deserve this time.
Thank you very much for talking to us.
Thank you.
And thank you, Lisa Longstaff. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Cumbria Police told us it would be inappropriate to comment on Layla Ibrahim's case, pending a potential review by the Criminal Cases Review Commission. The Crown Prosecution Service told us that cases like this are very rare, saying all such cases are examined and decided upon by specialist, experienced prosecutors who strike a balance between not deterring genuine complaints and recognising the need to protect the innocent from false allegations. Still to come in the last half hour of the programme, as German police stage